missed the cue. I got into the video thinking, I need that jacket. I'm sitting there like, I need it. Like, that would be so awesome to walk around, and then it's off, and I'm like, oh, I'm supposed to be here.
He's not going to let you walk around with that jacket.
Probably right. Can only try, right? Maybe, I don't know. Hey, today we are continuing the series, You're Not the Boss of Me. And Chanel posed an incredible question at the beginning, talking about Instagram. And it got me thinking about my Instagram, my social media presence, if you would. And I was trying to think about who is the most famous person that I follow. And you're probably going to hate me for this, but it's Jimbo Fisher. I'm a huge Aggie fan. And so there's excitement. Like, I see what he posted. I'm thinking, like, can Aggie football get here fast enough? Can it get? And it probably can't, but that's neither here nor there. But, Instagram is such an incredible thing, right? How many of you have Instagram? Any Instagram takers in here? I love it. There's a few, like, I kind of do. Like, I don't want you to, like, I do have it, kind of, sort of, but Instagram is this very fascinating thing that what we do is we post pictures of everything that's going on in life. And then it's this time trap, if you will, because you pull out your phone and you begin looking at all of the different pictures from everybody else, and you begin seeing their highlight reel. You begin seeing the vacations they went on. You begin seeing the food and the restaurants that they're eating at. You begin seeing everything that's going on in their life. You begin seeing, like, the cool clothes that they're wearing or the places they're shopping. And if I'm really honest, it bothers me a little bit, because I begin thinking, wow, whoa. If only, maybe. Like, I begin to get bothered by the way you can cook a steak in your green egg, and I'm thinking, I need charcoal and lighter fluid, and sometimes I use too much lighter fluid because I love fire, and then it tastes, but it's a valuable trade-off, right? Like, the more lighter fluid, the bigger the flame. That's just the way I live, right? And so 1 bottle per hamburger unit, and so it just... Yeah, hopefully it bothers you as well, all right? Like, I might drop dead any moment now, but that's neither here nor there. But I begin to get bothered by the things that are going on. And so I realize there's really only one way that I can fix this internal wrestle that I have, this internal rub. And it's this. I decided that I just need to do everything I can to make you jealous of me. So I've downloaded a couple of apps. There's actually a really cool app that you can get, Lightroom, that you can change the filters. You don't even need Instagram filters. It imports them to Instagram, and you can crop it really close. You should see how many different pictures are on my phone, because I really want to get the best picture, not just any picture, right? You need to take 30 pictures before you get the perfect picture of the cute kids, right? And so there's, like, William, you're not looking at the camera. Stephen, you don't see the other side of it. You don't see the yelling at them. Guys, everybody's going to see this picture, and I need them to like me. So behave, right? You don't see that part. You just see the highlight reel. You see the touch-ups, the fix. You see everything that looks just so right. And my intention is that I want you to be jealous of me. So I hope it's working. No, nobody does that. But do we? I mean, really, when we really think about Instagram, nobody really sits there and says, I want everybody to be jealous of me. But deep down inside, we're thinking, how many likes can this picture get? And maybe if I do that, maybe I will have more likes then. And we begin to compare and contrast, and we begin to look at and begin to think about how my life is not as good as, or maybe my life is better than. And one of the things I found in Instagram, and this is something that I think is so valuable, the win when it comes to comparison is it's a reminder that there's ultimately no win when it comes to comparison. There genuinely is no win at all when it comes to how we compare ourselves to other people. Now, that's free of charge. I heard Chanel talk about comparison. I thought, let's talk about that anyway. Just so happens that I had this image right there on my TV as well. It was beautiful timing, right? Today we're talking about You're Not the Boss of Me. And the tagline for our series has been this. It's been how to say no to the emotions that control us. How to say no to those emotions that want to control us. And it's a difficult thing, because so many times we struggle with this idea of the emotions inside of us. I don't know about you, but so many times I see that the emotions inside of me, that they begin to raise their ugly head, and it tends to come out in things I say. I mean, things I really didn't mean to say, but things that come out of my mouth. And what we began to look at, and especially in week 1, we looked at this idea that the things that come out of our mouth are an indication of really what's in the heart. And where we got that idea is because of what Jesus had to say when he had his crew rallied around and he made this incredible statement, especially in this time and age, because during this period, the religious leaders, they took great value in what went into the mouth. There were a lot of religious rituals and laws around what you could consume and what you could eat. And so Jesus spoke right into that, and it was incredible. And listen to what he said in Matthew chapter 15. He says, "Don't you see that whatever enters the mouth goes into the stomach and then out of the body?" Like, that's my boys' theme verse right now. They're 3 and 5, and they realize everything that goes into the body turns into a 4-letter word. P-O-O-P, that's the 4-letter word we're talking about. But don't you see that whatever enters the mouth goes into the stomach and then out of the body? And I can only imagine the disciples are like, duh. And Jesus continues on and he says this, "But the things that come out of a person's mouth come from the heart, and these defile them." In other words, it's the things that come out of our mouth that puts us at odds with people. The things that come out of our mouth, that's what puts us at odds with God. The things that we say are the very things that oftentimes will put a barrier between who we are and what God thinks of us. And the reason he says this is he continues on and he says, well, this is what comes out of your heart. "For out of the heart come evil thoughts, murder, adultery, sexual immorality, theft, false testimony, slander." I mean, these are the things that come directly out of our heart. To which many of us would say, yeah, but hold up a second. When I said that, wait a second, Scott. I mean, this is a pretty hefty list. Like murder, adultery, false testimony, slander, like these aren't stored up in our hearts. But the truth is, what Jesus is saying is what comes out of our mouth, the words and the deeds, is an indicator of what's really on the inside, what's really inside the heart. And so oftentimes we'll say things, and what happens after we say things? We'll make this declaration, right? I didn't mean to say that. I didn't mean to do that. Or maybe even better, we'll say this. We'll say, well, you know what? I'm not sure where that came from. I don't know where that came from. And it's almost as if we're trying to justify this to the people that we're around because we want them to think better of us. We don't want them to really see our heart. I mean, let's be honest. If I were to run over you today with my car and I were to say, I didn't mean to do that,
We know you're lying.
it's still gonna hurt. Well, it depends on who it is. No. But if I said I didn't mean to do that, it's still gonna hurt. You're still gonna stand up and be like, ouch, could you be more careful? What were you on your phone? What were you thinking? Like, you're gonna be, even though I said I didn't mean to do that, it's still gonna hurt. And the same is true with our words and deeds. We can try to plaster justifications around it. But isn't it true that at the end of the day, what is said is ultimately an expression of what's on the inside? What we do is an expression of what's on the inside. And so maybe this is what you say, and I apologize if I just stole your thunder, that now your spouse is saying that, hey, wait, Scott just said that's an indication of the heart. But it's true for me as well. Like that's what I was saying earlier. This is a difficult task for us to tackle because it hits each of us individually. And so when we say things like this, ultimately it's a sign of what's lurking on the inside, of the challenges, the struggles that we have. So last week we talked about guilt and how what's in your past doesn't have to define you, but it needs to remind you. And as we deal with guilt, we need to remember that there is no condemnation for those who are in Christ Jesus, that the things in the past, they are things in the past. Like you don't have to continue to wallow in them, but there are things that we can do to let go of the guilt, and confession can be so valuable to the heart and to the soul. And today we're going to look at possibly what I would think and what I believe of myself is probably the ugliest part of myself. And it's this 4-letter word, envy. We're going to look at envy. Now, envy is kind of a difficult thing. It's be almost cuter if I put jealousy up there, because jealousy just doesn't have the sinister ring that envy really has. But today, what I want to look at is envy, because when I'm really honest with myself, this is the very thing that I hate most about myself. That at times I can celebrate other people's demise. At times I can be excited about when other people don't do as well as I do. That I can be sorrowful and frustrated when I see other people succeed. That has envy all over it. And King Solomon, who is possibly one of the wisest individuals to ever walk the face of the earth, he wrote a couple of different books. In fact, several of the letters that he wrote, the journals he wrote, are right in the middle of our Bible. And the books come from basically the words of wisdom, because he was a wise individual. And I love Proverbs, because when I think about Proverbs, it's a journal. As if a granddad who has lived his life and is so excited about what he's learned and the mistakes he's made, and he's got his grandkids in really close. And he's like, guys, listen to me. I don't want you to make the same mistakes I made. So let me share with you all of these nuggets of wisdom. And he just started writing Proverbs. When I read Proverbs, I pretend that I'm at my granddad's feet and he's just sharing these words of wisdom upon me and whoever's sitting around me. But listen to what he had to say about this topic. In Proverbs chapter 14, he says, envy rots the bones. Envy rots the bones. Isn't it true that envy leaves us competing with people that really don't even know there's a competition? Envy leaves us competing with people that don't even realize that we're competing against them. It leaves us sitting there, and this is probably a little bit closer to home, but it leaves us sitting there in a world of Pinterest, in a world of Instagram, looking at how well our birthday parties are, looking at how great our life is in comparison to everything else that's going on. And we begin to see, well, great, we had a birthday party that was all about Blue Angels. Well, they had a party that was at the airport, and they had a party that the Blue Angels were actually there. And you begin to see what I had was not near as good as what they had. We find ourselves in a competition. And this competition is something that we're trying to win. And what happens when we win the competition? We become a little bit arrogant because we're beating you. And you don't even know that I'm in a competition with you. We're winning against you. And you don't even know that there's a battle going on. And so I'm arrogant at the fact that I'm beating you in a competition that you don't even know we're competing against. Or it leaves me deflated because I'm losing. I can't measure up. I can't be who I really want to be because you keep kicking my tail, and I just get this deflated look. And so we try to mirror it. We try to navigate life, and we either find ourselves frustrated or arrogant. So which I have some words of wisdom. Hopefully this works. Hopefully this sits well. We'll leave it here, and then we'll go with this on our merry way, if that's okay. Here's my challenge for us when it comes to this. We just need to knock it off. That's it. All right, so let's pray and we'll get out of here, right? If only it were that easy. If only we could just knock it off. But you see, one of the things that I'm a firm believer is that in our day and age, envy is not something we're gonna get rid of. It's not a problem that we're gonna be able to solve as much as it is a tension that we're gonna have to manage. It's a tension that's gonna be with us everywhere we go. It's a tension that we're gonna have to wrestle with, we're gonna have to navigate. It's a tension that ultimately we're gonna have to learn in our own lives. How do we manage the tension? And so for us today, I wanna look at something Solomon said. He wrote in another book, in the book of Ecclesiastes, after living his entire life, he writes this journal, if you would, this idea of now that I've chased after everything, this is what I've learned. This is what I've gleaned from. And Solomon is going to give us a place to go when envy begins to take root in our heart. He's going to give us a place to go mentally to remind us how to navigate, how to handle the struggles, the frustrations. When we begin to drift into discontentment, when we begin to drift into arrogance because of this fight, he's going to give us a mental picture as to what we can do and what we can say. But not just that, he's going to give us a picture of what we can do emotionally whenever we find ourselves in the middle of this battle, this tension that is envy. So, what did Solomon have to say? Glad you asked. In Ecclesiastes chapter 4, he shares, he says, I saw that all toil, and toil is basically working hard. I saw that all toil and achievement spring from one person's envy of another. I mean, this is 3,000 years ago, and Solomon is sitting there saying, hey, guess what? All achievement comes from one person's envy of another. Things haven't really changed. Isn't that true? That's what it is of us as well. And he continues on. He saw that all toil and all achievement spring from one another's envy of one another. And he says, this too is meaningless. It's this idea that when we are fighting for this race, when we're trying to compete with one another, it ends up being meaningless. We end up chasing and fighting and doing things in a race that there's no finish line. We're trying to figure out life, and we're just running and running and running, and we're in races and competitions with people that don't even know we're in a competition, and it's meaningless. And he continues on and he says this, it's a chasing after the wind. How interesting of a word picture. Have you ever tried to chase the wind? It's endless. There's no finish line. You're constantly running and running and chasing and chasing. There's never any finish line. You're constantly looking and trying to figure out, how do I win? How do I get in front of the wind? And it just continues to evade you. It's elusive and it's crazy. And isn't that true of envy as well? Is there's this elusive nature to envy. And the reason is because there's always an in everything we see. There's always the newer, the shinier, the better, the nicer. There's always the faster, the better looking. There's always an in everything we find. And when we're chasing the wind and we're watching the all around us, there's something that is guaranteed, and it's this: dissatisfaction is always guaranteed. Dissatisfaction, this idea that I'm never gonna measure up. We were laughing earlier today about different operating systems on a computer, and we were laughing. I was like, my iPhone is always the next year. I'm like, whatever iPhone is currently coming out, I'm looking for like maybe the next version or 2 versions away. Like that's when I'll finally get that iPhone, because it's just the way we roll today. I don't know what it is, but I'm like, let's just wait a couple of renditions. But there's always nicer. There's always newer. You look at cars, your car, once you get off the lot, there's always gonna be a newer car. And when we begin to race, when we chase the wind, what we find is dissatisfaction is guaranteed. Envy steals the joys of our accomplishments. It steals the joys of our accomplishments because there's always somebody that is better. There's always somebody that has done better. There's always somebody that has nicer, bigger, crazier. So when envy begins to raise up within us, our challenge is to simply say, envy, you're not the boss of me. Envy, you're not the boss of me. I don't chase the wind. Envy, you're not the boss of me. I don't chase the wind. And you know what? When I see the newer, when I see the nicer, when I see the better, what I'm gonna be tempted to say is I need that, but ultimately, isn't that just chasing the wind? Oh, you've got nicer, nope, that's chasing the wind. I don't chase the wind. That's sideways energy. That's not for me. I don't need this. This is chasing the wind. It's a waste of time. But on the other hand, isn't it true that if all we ever do is we fight this rat race, what's the alternative? To be passive, isn't it? If I'm not gonna just pursue everything, I'm not gonna try to get all the accomplishments, I guess the other side of it is just to do nothing at all and just to put my feet up and twiddle my thumbs and just enjoy life as it comes. And I'm glad that you thought that. At least that's the alternative of just pursuing and pursuing and pursuing. Because Solomon, he had something to say about that as well. In Ecclesiastes 4, verse 5, he says, fools fold their hands and ruin themselves. So, if the accomplishments that I'm striving for are based out of envy, and Solomon would say envy rots the bones, but yet he says that if I don't shoot for accomplishments, I just sit back, that will ruin myself. There's gotta be something in the middle. There's gotta be something where I'm not pursuing everything, but I'm not just a lazy bum that's ruining myself. And Solomon gives us an answer. He gives us an antidote. He gives us an idea that finds ourselves in the middle. And he says this in verse 6. He says, better one handful with tranquility than two handfuls with toil and chasing the wind. In other words, it's better to have one handful with tranquility, with peace, with this understanding that at the end of the day, I'm satisfied, than to have two handfuls and never content, have two handfuls and constantly chasing the wind. He says, better one handful with tranquility. It's better to find your limit. It's better not to necessarily always strive for the newer, nicer, bigger, better, but to find contentment, to find value in what's in one hand and say, you know what? Two handfuls with chasing the wind, I'm going to put that to the side. I love the picture of tranquility. It's this idea of just a serene peace. It's this idea that at the end of the day, you come home and you rest. It's the antidote of our culture today. I'm reading a book right now that's talking about Generation Z. And in the midst of Generation Z, which is ultimately everything in our family ministry, they surveyed 1,000 middle school and high school students. And they said, what is the one thing you would change about your parents' parenting style? That's always an interesting question to ask teenagers, right? I wish they would give me more freedom. I wish they wouldn't be so demanding. You know what was interesting? Over 40% of the kids surveyed said, I wish my parents weren't so stressed out. / I wish my parents could rest. Over 40% of over 1,000 teens, that's over 400. And I mean, there were a litany of answers, but the overwhelming majority, the favorite was this idea that I wish my parents would just rest. I wish they weren't so stressed out. That's the picture of tranquility, of just resting, of being satisfied. What Solomon is basically saying with this verse is less is more when it leads to contentment. That less is more when it leads to contentment, that it's okay not to have the bigger, nicer, better if it brings contentment to your heart and to your soul. It's okay not to always strive for more if it brings joy to your heart. Because the race, chasing after wind, it steals the joy that we have. And when we live this out, the beautiful thing is the result is peace. The result is this, the result is a deep breath and a satisfied soul, which this day and age is very difficult to come by. And y'all probably have it figured out. This is probably more for me than it is for you. But Solomon continues. And he's driving this idea of less is more and better is one hand with tranquility than two hands of toil. Listen to what he says as he continues. He says, again, I saw something meaningless under the sun. There was a man all alone. In other words, there's a man who he had no family. He had no wife. He was all alone. He had neither a son nor brother. In other words, everything that he's earning, everything he's working for is just for him. There's nothing to pass it on to. There's no place for it to go. And he continues and he talks about this man. He says, there was no end to his toil, yet his eyes were not content with his wealth. There was no end to what he could do. He was working this was probably a man that was working 28 hours a day. We'll just leave it at that. I mean, that might be what you feel like you're working a day, but regardless, there was no end. He could never stop working. He could never stop working. And then all of a sudden, in a moment of introspection, he stops. And he asked a question that I think it's a pivotal question for you and for me. He asked this question, for whom am I toiling? For whom am I working? Why am I doing this? What is the purpose? Who am I trying to prove this work to? For whom am I trying to prove it? What does this look like? Why am I constantly toiling and toiling? And toiling, and that's a cool word, toiling. For some of us, the person we're trying to prove it to, it might be your family, just trying to provide a better income, provide a better life. For some, the person we're trying to prove this to might be a parent that said something to you at an early age and said, you'll never amount to anything. You'll never be of any worth. And so now you're constantly in this mindset where you're working and you're working and you're working and you're working and you're trying to prove to your mom or your dad, who may or may not even still be here today, that I am worth it, I am valuable. Who are we trying to prove this to? For whom am I toiling? And he continues on and he says, and why am I depriving myself of enjoyment? For whom am I toiling for? And why am I depriving myself of enjoyment? Why am I robbing myself of the tranquility and the peace? And maybe for you today, perhaps this is a penetrating question as you're really wrestling with your career or wrestling with what your family dynamics look like, or wrestling with, should we take a job? Should we take a promotion? Should we do this? Should we do that? And when we really stop and ask the question, it doesn't mean that we shouldn't take the job. It doesn't mean we should. But what it does remind us is what is most important. What is, at the end of the day, what are we going to be most proud of? For whom am I toiling, and why am I depriving myself of enjoyment? If taking the next job, if running this rat race is just so you can prove something to somebody, whether they're here or not, so you can prove something to your kids, so you can provide a better life, the surveys say that the kids would rather you be stress-free than have all the ers. Would rather you be restful and filled with tranquility than bringing them 2 handfuls of toil and saying, look what I did for you. And Solomon continues. It's like, Solomon, could you just stop for a second? But he continues and he says this too is meaningless. It's a miserable business. This striving and pushing is meaningless. It's a miserable business. Here's the ramifications of what I see in this. Is in our culture today, we have Instagram, we have every single opportunity to look and see what everybody else is doing. We have every opportunity to look in everybody else's lane, to see the lives that everybody else is living. And what we find ourselves doing is we find ourselves stopping and looking left and looking right and looking at the impact, looking at the financial tabs, looking at the positions, looking at everybody to our right and our left. And we find ourselves comparing our journey, our life, to the people next to us. And we can get very discontent. We can get very dissatisfied. We can get very frustrated when we begin to look at what other people are doing and we look outside of our lane. But what I genuinely believe is each and every one of us were created for a purpose, on purpose, in a lane to do what you were called to do, what you were designed to do. And when we look at everybody else's lane and we get jealous of the races that everybody else is running, what we find is we get very discontent quickly. And when we look over our shoulder, we can get very proud of ourselves. Look, I'm doing better than. Or frustrated because, wow, they've got it all together. And if you're a Christian, if you're a follower of Jesus, if following Jesus is a big deal to you, this isn't just a maybe you can do this. There's significant ramifications. Because if you're a follower of Jesus, here's where this gets really serious, because I genuinely believe that you'll never experience God's purpose for your life while you're distracted by God's purpose for somebody else's life. That as long as we're more focused on what everybody else is doing, we're never going to truly see God's purpose, God's design for our life. If confession is good for the soul, can I share something with you guys? This is a struggle. I shared it with our service programming team this morning. Like, for me, envy is a big deal. It's probably the thing that I hate most about myself, because there's something inside of me that when I see somebody else succeed, I get frustrated. There's something inside of me when I see other people that fall short, I begin to celebrate and think, how good am I? And this comes crystal clear, especially around churches. I wish pastors were just great people, right? All around, just beautiful people. I'm going to say this. You're probably going to be like, I'm out. See you later. Like, what kind of pastor is that? But we started this church, and well, thank you. We started this church in 2016, and the joys that were found in our living room have continually progressed. And it's been beautiful to see what God has been able to do in and through you. And yet, there's several church planners I know that have started before us that I have seen fall short, that I've seen have to close their doors. And I've always had to check myself because there's something inside of me that says we did it better. Look at what they should have done. If I were in their shoes, this is what I would have done differently. And we begin to well up with pride and say, the other side is true as well. I know a good friend of mine who's about 6 months ahead of us, and today they're celebrating their grand opening in their brand new facility. And I'm thinking, what the mess? Like, I have to check myself not to say, I hope nobody shows up. How, sorry. Let's pray.
Father, help Scott. Amen.
But if I could be real honest with you, it's so difficult in our culture today where everywhere we look, we see what everybody else is. There is a tension we have to manage. And for you, it's probably not this church planning gig. It's probably not, I look at pastors all the time and I think, But for me, it comes from a place of gratitude because I see the work that is in the faces of so many of our leaders. And there's nothing more that I want than to allow our leaders not to rest in a new building, but to be able to expand our opportunities in a new facility. And yet, right now, we're 6:30 in the morning, trailers roll in, and we're setting things up, and we're tearing things down, and we're continuing the rigors. Because I know other people that have been doing setup, tear down for 10 years. And it's not a comparison game. It is, what is the lane that God has called you to live? What is the lane that God's asked you to be in? What has God designed you to do? And if we're more focused on what everybody else's purpose is, we're gonna lose God's purpose for our life. We're gonna be so dissatisfied and discontent that we are gonna be welled up with envy, and it's going to be the very worst thing about you. Now, I'll be honest with you. This afternoon, my buddy that's opening the new church today, you know what I'm gonna do? I'm gonna text him. I'm gonna tell him how proud I am of him. I'm gonna tell him how excited we are that they get the chance to do ministry in a brand new facility. But let me ask you, what is that spot of envy for you? What is that spot that when you see it in their life, when you see it on their screen, when you see their Instagram feed, there's nothing more that you want than to see the next picture that is the dead end, that woo. What is it in your life that makes you feel so excited? Because Solomon, when he told us that envy rots the bones, he opened off that. I just gave you the last half. I want to share the whole passage with you because it is one of the keys to overcoming envy. He says this in Proverbs 14, a heart at peace gives life to the body. A heart at peace gives life to the body, that when we can rest, when we can, there's life. Isn't it true when envy gets the best of us, what do? There's not life. It can really rot the bones. So our mission, it's a tension to manage. We're not gonna overcome envy. We live in a world of crazy competitions. You're not gonna overcome envy. It is a tension to manage. But when you find envy welling up in you, our mission for you is to simply declare, you can't win by chasing the wind. You can't win by chasing the wind. You can't win. Envy, you're getting the best of me. I can't win. There's nothing I can do by chasing the wind. So what does that look like for us? How do we genuinely live this out? How do we stay in our lane? The first thing that I would encourage you is this. It's look to other people for inspiration, not imitation. When you see other people running their race and they're doing it well, be inspired by what they're doing. When you see other people that are living their race and are doing an incredible work from their lane, be inspired by what they are able to do and not frustrated and envious. Allow inspiration to be your go-to and not discontentment. The second thing I would encourage you, and this is a quote that Andrew Peterson made, who wrote The 12 Rules for Life. And which I think is Jordan Peterson. I apologize, not Andrew. Andrew Peterson is a singer-songwriter. You should really look him up. Anyway, Jordan Peterson wrote a book. Andrew Peterson wrote songs. Jordan Peterson, in 12 Rules for Life, he made this statement. He said, compare yourself to who you were yesterday, not to who someone else is today. You want to compare? Compare yourself to who you were yesterday. Don't be looking at what other people are doing in their lane. Look at where you've come. Look at the progress you've made. Look at how you have taken steps forward. Compare yourself to who you were yesterday, not to who someone else is today. And the third thing that I would encourage you, how do we do this? Well, this might be a little bit more, this might speak to those with religious roots. But here's what I would encourage you. Count your blessings, not your neighbors. Count your blessings. I mean, have you ever really sat down with a journal and began just to say, God, I'm grateful for, God, I'm grateful for, God, thank you for, thank you for, thank you for? Have you really sat down and really began to think about the many, many ways that you have been blessed, the blessings that are in your life? Our challenge is not to count our neighbor's blessings. That's envy. But to be very cognizant of your blessings, of how you have found blessings through the course of life. The things that are valuable to you, the things that bring life, that bring a smile to your face. So here's my challenge is I don't want you to miss life. I don't want you to miss what God has called you to. And so when envy begins to really rile itself up, when envy begins to really to settle into your heart and you find yourself being discontent, I want you to stop and declare. I want you just to pause. When your mind drifts, I want you to stop and declare that envy, you are not the boss of me. Envy, you are not the boss of me. I will not chase the wind. I'm not going to chase the wind. Envy, you are not the boss of me. I will not chase the wind. When comparison begins to come to play, envy, you're not the boss of me. I won't chase the wind. I'm going to celebrate. I'm going to write a thank you note. I'm going to champion what other people are doing in success. I'm going to provide empathy and sympathy when I see others fall short. Envy, you're not the boss of me. I will not chase the wind. Besides, as a follower of Jesus, we already have a boss. And Jesus gave us very specific instructions. And the instructions he gave to us were don't compare yourself to one another. Rather, love one another. You really can't do both. You can't love and compare yourself to at the same time. Don't compare yourself to one another. Love one another. Envy gets in the way of that all the time. So, envy, you're not the boss of me. Envy, you're not the boss of me. I will not chase the wind. Envy, you are not the boss of me. I know everything inside of me wants to say, I hope it falls flat on its face. But envy, you're not the boss of me. I will not chase the wind. I have to see pictures of them all the time. I see everything that's going on. Instagram is filled with comparison. I will not chase the wind. I will celebrate. I will not chase the wind. Envy, you're not the boss of me. Besides, when we really live this idea out, when we love instead of compare, we're doing the very thing that Jesus called to do, and it's to answer the question, what does love require of me? When we drive that question into every ethic of our life, what we find is you will find your life is better. You'll find your relationships are better when love is the ethic that is running through the relationship instead of envy. And you'll find that you're better at life when you celebrate rather than get frustrated. That when we love instead of compare, we find that our life it goes smoother. And we find that our life tends to be better. That's what Jesus called us to do. He makes a better boss than envy. So, as we close, I want to just throw 3 questions at you. Just some things actually it's 2 questions and a statement, because Ecclesiastes chapter 4, verse 6 is a great passage that I want us all to memorize together, that better 1 handful of tranquility than 2 handfuls of toil. But here's a couple questions just to get you thinking. Maybe this is some questions for your lunchtime conversation. There's no football game today, so we can talk about envy all day long. Like, man, I wish the Cowboys were in the Super Bowl. I hope both teams lose, like really bad. I mean, I will celebrate both teams. Anyway, in what areas are you most inclined to chase the win? In what areas are you most inclined to chase the win? Maybe it's in parenting. Maybe it's in your career. Maybe it's in your neighborhood. In what areas are you most inclined to chase the win? The second thing, are you competing internally with anyone? And it might not be with everyone, but it might be with a sibling. It might be with a parent. It might be with a neighbor, the guy around the corner, the guy that you share a cubicle with. You're trying to get the promotion. You want to beat him to the punch. Are you competing internally with anyone? And to help us fight this cause, I want to encourage you to memorize Ecclesiastes 4:6. Ecclesiastes 4:6. Better is 1 handful with tranquility than 2 handfuls with toil. Let's pray. God, we love you and we thank you so much for today. God, we ask that you would, God, I pray for me specifically. God, envy is the very thing that frustrates the tar out of me. God, how I can find satisfaction in somebody else's demise is beyond me. But God, I pray for us collectively that we would be able to, rather than compare, that we would find it within ourselves to love those very people that we tend to compare ourselves to. God, whether it be a sibling, God, give us the grace to love well. If it's a parent, give us the honor to love and respect while cherishing the relationship and not trying to prove anything anymore. God, if it's a colleague, a coworker, a fellow mom, a fellow dad that has it all together, God, give us the encouragement to quit competing. And God, help us to find ways to love like you first loved us. God, we need you. We love you. And we thank you. It's in Jesus' name that I pray. Amen.